Diese Extremisten,
Kriegstreiber,
Verbrecher,
als ein Diktator,
der Schurken, auch Feinde der Menschenrechte.
Mr. Chairman, esteemed members of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, ladies and gentlemen. The transition from years of confinement in a maximum security prison to being here before the representatives of 46 nations and 700 million people is a profound and a surreal shift. The experience of isolation for years in a small cell is difficult to convey. It strips away one's sense of self, leaving only the raw essence of existence. I am yet not fully equipped to speak about what I have endured, the relentless struggle to stay alive, both physically and mentally, nor can I speak yet about the deaths by hanging, murder, and medical neglect of my fellow prisoners. I apologize in advance if my words falter or if my presentation lacks the polish you might expect from such a distinguished forum. However, like so many of the efforts made in my case, whether they were from parliamentarians, presidents, prime ministers, the Pope, UN officials and diplomats, unions, legal and medical professionals, academics, activists, or citizens, none of them should have been necessary. None of the statements, resolutions, reports, films, articles, events, fundraisers, protests, and letters over the last 14 years should have been necessary. But all of them were necessary because without them, I never would have seen the light of day. This unprecedented global effort was needed because of the legal protections that did exist. Many existed only on paper, were not effective in any remotely reasonable time. I eventually chose freedom over unrealizable justice after being detained for years and facing a 175-year sentence with no effective remedy. Justice, for me, is now precluded as the US government insisted in writing into its plea agreement that I cannot file a case at the European Court of Human Rights or even a Freedom of Information Act request over what it did to me as a result of its extradition request. I want to be totally clear. I am not free today because the system worked. I am free today after years of incarceration because I pled guilty to journalism. I pled guilty to seeking information from a source. I pled guilty to obtaining information from a source, and I pled guilty to informing the public what that information was. I did not plead guilty to anything else. As I emerge from the dungeon of Belmarsh, the truth now seems less discernible, and I regret how much ground has been lost during that time period. How expressing the truth has been undermined, attacked, weakened, and diminished. I see more impunity, more secrecy, more retaliation for telling the truth, and more self-censorship. It is hard not to draw a line from the US government's prosecution of me, its crossing the Rubicon by internationally criminalizing journalism, to the chilled climate for freedom of expression that exists now. We obtained and published truths about tens of thousands of hidden casualties of war and other unseen horrors, about programs of assassination, rendition, torture, and mass surveillance. We revealed not just when and where these things happened, but frequently the policies, the agreements, and the structures behind them. When we published Collateral Murder, the infamous gun camera footage of a US Apache helicopter crew eagerly blowing to pieces Iraqi journalists and their rescuers, the visual reality of modern warfare shocked the world. Our journalism elevated freedom of information and the public's right to know. But transnational repression is also conducted by abusing legal processes. The lack of effective safeguards against this means that Europe is vulnerable to having its mutual legal assistance and extradition treaties hijacked by foreign powers to go after dissenting voices in Europe. When powerful nations feel entitled to target individuals beyond their borders, those individuals do not stand a chance unless there are strong safeguards in place and a state willing to enforce them. Without this, no individual has a hope of defending themselves against the vast resources that a state aggressor can deploy. If the situation were not already bad enough in my case, the US government asserted a dangerous new global legal position. Only US citizens have free speech rights. Europeans and other nationalities do not have free speech rights. But the US claims its Espionage Act still applies to them regardless of where they are. So Europeans in Europe must obey US secrecy law with no defences at all as far as the US government is concerned. An American in Paris can talk about what the US government is up to, perhaps. But for a Frenchman in Paris, to do so is a crime with no defence, and he may be extradited just like me. Now that one foreign government has formally asserted that Europeans have no free speech rights, a dangerous precedent has been set. The rights of journalists and publishers within the European space are seriously threatened. Transnational repression cannot become the norm here. As one of the world's two great norm-setting institutions, PACE must act. The criminalisation of news-gathering activities is a threat to investigative journalism everywhere. I was formally convicted by a foreign power for asking for, receiving, and publishing truthful information about that power while I was in Europe. The fundamental issue is simple. Journalists should not be prosecuted for doing their jobs. Journalism is not a crime. It is a pillar of a free and informed society. Freedom of expression and all that flows from it is at a dark crossroad. I fear that unless institutions like PACE wake up to the gravity of the situation, it will be too late. Let us all commit to doing our part to ensure that the light of freedom never dims, that the pursuit of truth will live on, and that the voices of the many are not silenced by the interests of the few. The uncertainty within Europe as to the defences that can be used by journalists here to protect themselves from transnational repression and extradition, if left in its current state, will inevitably be abused by other states. So norm-setting institutions like PACE must move to make the situation clear that what happened to me cannot happen again. It is also the change in the society, where we once produced where we once released important war crimes videos that stirred public debate. Now, every day, there are live-streamed horrors from the wars in Ukraine and the war in Gaza. Hundreds of journalists have been killed in Gaza and Ukraine combined. The impunity seems to mount, and it is still uncertain what we can do about it. Yes, I was a political prisoner. The political basis for the US government's retributive acts against me was in relation to publishing the truth about what the US government had done. The European arrest warrant system was introduced post-September 11 with the political rationale that it would be used for the fast transfer of Muslim terrorists between European states. The first European arrest warrant that was issued by Sweden for a drunk driver. We must understand that when we pick a disfavored group, Muslims at that time, and say, well, this repressive legislation, it's only going to be for them. Inevitably, bureaucrats, elements of the security state, will seize upon those measures and apply them more broadly. Injustice to one person spreads soon enough to most people. I don't know the statistics on how often arrest warrants are abused. There was an attempt to extradite me without any charge from the United Kingdom by Sweden. My naivete was believing in the law. When push comes to shove, laws are just pieces of paper, and they can be reinterpreted for political expediency. They are the rules made by the ruling class, more broadly, and if those rules don't suit what it wants to do, it reinterprets them or, hopefully, changes them. I had lost 14 years on the house arrest, embassy, siege, and maximum security prison. So I think this is an important lesson, that when a major power faction wants to reinterpret the law, it can push to have the element of the state, in this case the US Department of Justice, do that. And it doesn't care too much about what is legal, but I think we should understand a bigger picture, which is that whenever we make a law, we create a tool that self-interested bureaucrats, companies, and the worst elements of the security state will use and will expand the interpretation in order to achieve control over others. And that's why law reforms are constantly needed, because laws are abused and expanded. And so it needs a constant vigilance, but also great care in making laws in the first place, because they will be seized upon and abused. Of the larger media organizations, unfortunately, many of them went with their political or geopolitical alignment. So it was easy to gain support from media organizations in neutral states, and obviously states hostile to the United States. Allies of the United States took longer. Media organizations within the United States, the journalists there, not the lawyers, but the journalists, took longer still. It is a concern, and I can see a similar phenomenon happening with the journalists being killed in Gaza and Ukraine. That the political and geopolitical alignment of media organizations causes them to not cover those victims or cover only certain victims. This is a breach of journalistic solidarity. We all need to stick together to hold the line. A journalist censored anywhere spreads censorship, which can then affect us all. Similarly, journalists being killed or targeted by intelligence agencies need our firm commitment in writing or in broadcast. A debate about whether someone is a journalist or an activist. I understand that debate. I've tried in my work to be rigorously accurate. I believe accuracy is everything. Primary sources are everything. But there is one area where I am an activist and all journalists must be an activist. Journalists must be activists for the truth. Journalists must be activists for the ability to convey the truth. And that means standing up for each other and making no apologies about it. Just a few final words. In 2010, I was living in Paris. I went to the United Kingdom and never came back until now. It's good to be back. It's good to be amongst people who, as we say in Australia, who give a damn. It's good to be amongst friends. I would just like to thank all the people who have fought for my liberation and who have understood, importantly, that my liberation was coupled to their own liberation. That the basic fundamental liberties which sustain us all have to be fought for, and that when one of us falls through the cracks, soon enough those cracks will widen and take the rest of us down. So thank you for your thought, your courage in this and other settings, and keep up the fight.
Thank you, Mr. Assange.
Liebe Zuschauer, wenn euch unsere Beiträge gefallen, teilt sie unbedingt in den sozialen Medien. Abonniert unseren Kanal und drückt auf die Glocke, damit ihr keine Veröffentlichung von Gegenpol verpasst.
Diese Extremisten,
Kriegstreiber, Verbrecher,
als ein Diktator,
der Schurken, auch Feinde der Menschenrechte.